I haven't hand knit a vintage sweater in a long time due to repetitive use injury, but I am finally feeling like I'm at the point where I can try it one more time. And I want to answer the question of, am I at the point where I can knit an entire vintage sweater using vintage tools and techniques? For the vintage tools, I think I'm pretty set because I have an entire bucket of vintage knitting needles. I have some Langjaval yarn, and of course I have my vintage knitting pattern. It's this sweater right here. I have tried to knit it a few times already and kept on messing up with the cables. I don't think it's just a question of tools, but it's a question of, am I going to be able to count properly this time and get everything correct? This time, I think we are off to a very strong start. First thing I want to talk about are the needles that I'm using. And there's something very unique about these needles. I don't know if you can see that, but they are super bendy. I have to say that these are probably some of my most favorite knitting needles that I've ever used. I usually prefer to use circular needles. This isn't all of them, but here's a lot of my vintage knitting needles, some of my circular needles, and usually when I'm knitting any kind of project, even if it's knit flat, I will use circular needles because what happens is when you get quite a distance in your project, there's quite a bit of weight on your needles that you're working with. And if you use the traditional vintage straight needles that don't bend or flex at all, when you're making the movements and you have a lot of weight down here, you got a big leverage arm, it gets really tiring on your hands. So I prefer these because it just hangs down here, but at least the circular needles that I use, they're short. And so the end of my hand hangs past that solid non-flexible part of the needle so that when I'm knitting, that last bit of my hand isn't supported at all. As I'm knitting with these flexible needles, the entirety of the rest of my hand is supported, but when I'm moving the work, it just doesn't feel as heavy. So far, I have been able to knit the longest on these. The pattern is only written in one size, which is quite a small size, size 14. I'm a 38 bust. And some vintage patterns will go up to 38, but they're typically written 32, 34, 36. I tend to always knit the largest size with slightly bigger needles to have sweaters fit me. We'll see if this one fits. So I have knit the start of the front of the sweater, and now it's time to do some cables. I don't use a cable needle. A few years ago I had to do cables without using a cable needle, and that is my preferred method of knitting cables from now on because honestly I'm too forgetful. With my cable needles, I lose them. So if you've never seen anyone do a cable knitting without a cable needle, let me take you in close and then you can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to keep on working on the cabling at the bottom of the front. It says to do it for 4 inches and then I will meet you again once I'm done with that. Alright, I am done with the bottom of the cabling on the front portion of this sweater, and I have a confession to make on something, and I have a mistake that happened as we were knitting it. I think I'll start with a mistake, but after you finish with the cabling, you're then supposed to increase for the front. It's from 115 to 130 stitches by adding 15 stitches across your next row. So I put some stitch markers in place to help mark where I was going to increase and try to split the increases evenly. And I got to about the middle of the piece when I realized that I had already done about 10 increases and I only needed 5 left. So like I had increased a lot on the right hand side of my work and not as much on the left. Typically mistakes like that don't bother me too much, but what I realized was that the center of the cables on the pattern at the top is going to be pointing down the center of my body, and if you follow that line with your eye, because of my uneven increases, it wasn't going to point exactly directly to the center of my waistband, and it might sit slightly askew, and I knew I would regret it if I left it. I also knew that it didn't bother me enough to undo the increases. So what did I do? I found the exact center of where the piece was supposed to be based on the cabled bit, and I found the center of the stitches. The simplest fix that I could think of is then I knit 3 together on the side where it increased too much, and I increased by 3 on the other side. For me personally, it was easier than undoing my knitting and then re-knitting, but I still wanted to fix that off-center problem because I knew it would bother me. Okay, now to the confession. My confession is I've actually already knit the entire back of this sweater. It's due to my schedule and making videos and things like that. I have in the past often done this when I knit vintage sweaters. I'll knit the back and one of the sleeves in the off times where it's like dark or really late so that I film the front and the other sleeve as the example and to show on video. But
I wanted to tell you as a bit of an explanation of what I'm going to do next, which is I'm switching to my machine. I have already knit this entire back and I couldn't stop. I love knitting so much and I love knitting vintage sweaters so much that I just kept going. I am so happy with how this looks. I'm so happy with the color, with the design. I can't wait to see what the front looks like, but my hands really hurt. I could finish the rest of the front by hand and then do the sleeves, I guess, on the machine, but the construction of the sleeves is so different to any other vintage pattern I have ever encountered. I really want to do those by hand and I really want to show you what that's like. To do that, I think step one, we got to do a gauge swatch on my knitting machine. I think there'll be kind of a very obvious transition between my hand knitting and the machine knitting. I want to reduce that as much as possible by getting my machine knit gauge as close to my hand knit gauge as possible. So let me grab some yarn. Step one, rewind the yarn. Step two, gauge swatch. Step three, actually start knitting the rest of this sweater on my knitting machine. All right, I have rewound my yarn into a center pull ball. Feels like it has been an absolute age since I last used my beautiful knitting machine. I don't know the last time that I used this knitting machine. I was using the slightly larger one over there in December, but that's already 4 months ago now. Now for my yarn, I have so much deep green yarn. I obviously have a favorite. Okay, so we're gonna start at tension 5 and let's see how close that gets us to where we wanna be. And how many rows? Maybe like 20 rows. Now let me compare this to my hand knit. We might have to do another one, but it's a good start. Comparing these two, you can definitely tell the difference in regularity. This is approximately 6 stitches an inch. Vintage gauge and tension is closer to 8 stitches an inch. The loosest tension that I knit at tension 5 is 6.5-ish stitches an inch. So I think I'm going to redo the gauge swatch going from 8, 7, 6 and seeing which one of those would be the best match. So gauge swatch number 2, here we go. I'll knit at a tension right between 7 and 8. Perfect. So now that we know our gauge, let's get this lovely bit on my knitting machine and follow the rest of the instructions for that. Okay, the piece is on the knitting machine. It took a bit to get it on there. Now the next set of instructions are to knit for 7.5 inches, which is a 1/2 inch longer than the back. I just realized something. I put the piece on backwards. I put it on facing me. When you use a knitting machine, the wrong side faces you. It's been months since I've done it, so of course I forgot it. I'm very sad. I really, truly, right now, don't have it in me to redo this and flip it over the right way. If I had a garter bar, a lot of you have recommended that I get a garter bar, which is meant for things like this, like large transfers or flips, where literally I could just hook the garter bar in one across the whole piece, take it off, flip it, and put it back on. That would be nice. I'm at the point where I'm thinking, is it worth it for me to buy a garter bar online and wait for it to ship to me so that I don't have to go through the manual process of redoing this? I sulked with some chocolate and I spent some time. This is the right way around. I also ordered a garter bar for this machine. It's not going to be here for a few weeks, but I did order it because you all have been suggesting it to me. I was thinking about it, and today I really wish I would have followed through with getting one a lot sooner, like you all recommended last time. What do you think? Should we do the first row? Let's do row 1. Tension is correct. Yarn is fed. It's holding on. Weights are on. Okay. I would honestly cry if everything fell off right now. And I really hope I just didn't jinx myself. Oh, it's not knitting at all. Why are we not knitting? Hello? What? Oh, that's scary. Now I'm really scared that something's gonna happen. I'm watching you. I'm watching you real close. Don't even think about jumping off. I feel like I shouldn't threaten my machine. She's been through a lot. First row done. Oh shoot, I ran out. Oh, those last few stitches are gonna hop off. Oh, I shouldn't have kept going. I should have tied on more yarn. How can I save this? Oh my gosh, I am so glad I stopped when I did. Oh, that was almost very much a disaster. Do you see where the yarn ended? Literally, right there is the tail of the yarn. If I would have kept on knitting, that would have missed probably the last 3 or 4 stitches and unraveled all the way down. Do you see where that ends? What a close call. Okay, I'm gonna knit those stitches manually. Crisis averted. We are knit all the way back up to the end. I have 2 ends here that I can weave in. And let's hope that the rest of the body of this sweater is a lot less exciting. That was not even 3 minutes, and I have finished the body of the sweater up to the underarms. And I'll see you for the armhole shaping and my favorite part of this piece, the front V cable design. That'll be fun to do. It's a new day and I have a new bit of patience, so I can keep on working on my sweater that's on the knitting machine, and I'm very excited to get to this point. Also, I'm just looking at the viewfinder and realizing I have a few antennas, so I'm receiving signals on all channels. One thing I want to address with the knitting machine, because I was trying to see if I could knit this sweater using like just vintage techniques. Technically, knitting machines are vintage. They're more than vintage. They were invented in 1589, so they're hundreds of years old. But these like home type knitting machines that you would buy at home, including the ones that I have, are technically from like the 50s and 60s, not really the 40s and earlier, which is when this knitting pattern is made. So am I using a vintage technique? Technically, but not really from a time where home knitting machines would have been popular at the same time as the pattern for the sweater. But it's a bit of a technicality, but I hope it's okay because my hands hurt. So we have knit from the bottom border all the way to here, and now we are going to create this curve for the arm side. Knitting machines are a separate skill from hand knitting, and I've had some questions from people who ask, is machine knit still hand made? I don't think I can call it hand knit. I feel like that's not being very accurate, but I do think that it's still handmade because it does require its own set of skills to be able to use a knitting machine. Some of these special techniques include shaping of the armholes and the cabling, because the front V-neck cabling is happening at the exact same time as the shaping of the armholes. And in order to make cables stand out, what you do is you actually separate them with purl stitches. But purl stitches can't really be made on the main bed of the knitting machine. And as you can see here, I am going to be setting up the rubber bed, or the bed where I can purl in the same row as my knit stitches. In order to purl though, I have to transfer stitches from my main bed onto my rubber bed with these transfer needles. So these are all things that I don't do in hand knitting, but you have to learn how to do properly in machine knitting without losing any of your stitches, and trust me, I've lost so many stitches doing this incorrectly. The other skill I had to learn how to do, which is very different in my opinion on a knitting machine, is how to make cables work. So I have to use these transfer tools that are 2 needles wide, because I'm using a 4 needle cable pattern in order to cross the stitches over each other and then put them back onto the rubber bed before everything gets knit together. So I'm using a lot of different techniques here in one row in order to make this V-neck cabling and armhole shaping work on the pattern. So it is translatable onto the knitting machine, and I'm glad that I know a lot about knitting in order to do this, but it is definitely a separate skill in my opinion. I'm not done with the front, but nothing has gone wrong yet. Let's hope it stays that way, or at least it's something that we can fix. But I wanted to pop in because we are now working at the neckline, and I'm nervous. Do you see how the neckline dips down a little bit? In order to achieve that, we actually have to cast off some stitches in the middle. And the best way that I can think about doing that is I'm following the pattern. So I'm going to knit the first 37 stitches, and then I'm going to place all of the needles past those 37 stitches on the main bed and the rubber bed into the hold position, which is the all the way out position. And then I have to make sure that both of my carriages are set such that on hold needles are not worked. That's a scary point, because in the past when I've attempted to do this and things haven't been set right, everything's fallen off the machine. So am I nervous? Just a little bit. But I think I did it. I'm gonna try it and I'm gonna see what happens. So now I'm gonna use the rest of this tail to cast off for that rounded lower neckline. I am done with casting off of the middle neckline stitches. I've basically run out of yarn. And now basically I'm gonna be working on from here up on this side, and then I have to switch to make the matching one on the other side. So let me go wind that yarn, and then I might show you a little bit of what it looks like to work on one side of the neckline. Alright, the left side is done. I am mentally exhausted. I'm now going to do the matching right side, and I guess I will see you when it's time to take it off the machine. Okay, the last bit. It's time to take it off and see what kind of havoc I had going on. I didn't film it, but I did actually manage to lose. I dropped one stitch. Such a scary moment. I fixed it, but I was definitely on edge. Okay, here we go. How does it look? Oh, I love it. You can really see the V. There's a bit of important construction to talk about now. So let me lay the front and the back out on the ground, and then we'll chat a little bit about it. There's the front, and there's the back. And I've lined them up so that the shoulder bits are almost touching, and you can kind of see the arm side right there. Everything's curling under a little bit, so it makes it hard to see. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to sew together the shoulder stitches here and there, because we're not knitting the sleeves separate. What I find so interesting about this pattern is that the sleeves are knit into the arm side. So they're knit from the top down. Usually in vintage patterns, you knit the sleeves separately from the bottom up, and then you sew them into the arm side. But this way, we're knitting from here down, and we're actually picking up stitches around the arm side as we're knitting the sleeves. The sweater is now sewn together at the shoulder seams. This is the front. That's the back. It's still curling a little bit because I haven't sewed up the sides because the sleeves are next. I am a little stuffy because I got sick, so I'm so sorry. I'm trying to keep it to a minimum, but I might sound stuffy for the rest of this video just because, as luck would have it, of course I would get sick just as spring is coming. So according to the pattern, across the middle of the sleeve here, so where I sewed the shoulder seam together, I'm going to pick up 30 stitches. Then I'm going to increase to double that on the way back, and then on every row I'm going to pick up 5 more stitches on either side. So as I'm knitting back and forth, I'm knitting further and further down the arm side until I get to the very end. Then you knit the length of the sleeve that you'd like, then you knit the ribbing, and the sleeve is done, which is kind of cool. It saves you one seam, so you don't have to sew this seam, but it does want you to be a little bit exact in the pattern to pick up 120 stitches and be at the end of the arm side. So I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to hit that number exactly, to be honest, but we are going to try. Okay, so I'm going to go grab my needles, I'm going to drink some tea, and I'm going to sit and relax. I wanted to give you an update on the first sleeve that I am adding. So we started by picking up the center 30 here, then we increased to 60 because we want more puffiness at the top of the shoulder. And then I increased by 5 on either side evenly across. These stitch markers are here just to help me count to 120 because my brain is mush and I couldn't count above 20. So that's what I had to do to count to 120. But now I've picked up from one side of the arm side to the other, and it's time to knit for 5 inches straight, or however long you want your sleeve, and I decided just to follow the patterns. I just recorded a whole bunch of talking, and, well, I didn't record it. I did a lot of talking, thinking I recorded it. That's how we're doing this morning. Still a little
mushy brained. I hand knit to fill in the arm side here, and I'm now supposed to knit for 5 inches in stockinette. And I'm going to do that on the knitting machine to save my hands and wrists a little bit, and I'll finish out the cables on my knitting needles. I did some calculations. We have to do 50 rows in order to get to that length of 5 inches. And thankfully, I'm going to remember this time to put the work onto the machine the right way around, which is the wrong way around, technically. I don't have the garter bar yet that I ordered, so that wouldn't help me if I did that again, but we are hopefully not going to make that same mistake too soon, although nothing can be promised because who knows when I'll forget again. So we have 126 stitches, so I have to find 60 to the right and 60 to the left. So we are at, this is center, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Okay, I'm just looking at the time that my camera has here for how long I've been recording. I started recording just before I started knitting the first row, and even with a yarn break in the middle, which was kind of scary, it was less than 4 minutes to do 50 rows. So very worth it in my opinion. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'll finish out the sleeve by hand. I will see you to do that. So as I'm literally casting off my last few stitches on my sweater, guess what showed up at the door? You might not be able to guess from the box. Let me open it for you. Does that help a little bit? If not, that's totally fine. This is the garter bar, which would have saved me a few days ago from when I installed. It's a very unique use of the word for putting my knitting on the knitting machine backwards. It could have fixed that problem so fast rather than having to undo 130 stitches and then redo 130 stitches, which took quite a long time. I am on the very last few stitches. I think I'm on casting off my last 10 stitches or so on this sweater, and it has been a while since I finished a sweater. We've knit the sweater. We're not done, but we have knit everything. But now this is what the sweater looks like. So I'm going to lay it down on the ground, and you can hopefully see a little bit more about how it's going to be turned from this form into the sweater. We have the back, which I knit all by hand. We have the front. I think you can see a little bit that the texture is somewhat more even. And we have the 2 sleeves. Can you see which one was knit by machine, which one by hand? I'll let you leave a guess here what you think. It kind of just looks like the 4 points of a compass. We don't really look like a sweater yet, but what's going to happen is I'm going to pick it up at the shoulders right here like this, and there's our sweater shape. You can start to see that coming together. And then we are going to sew from the side all the way to the underarm. So this is going to be one seam only that we can sew up all in one. We're going to do that twice, and our sweater's done, but we're nearly there. So let's jump forward to when we have sewn up the sides and we have one neckline step to go. Let's look at that. With all of the seams sewed, we are down to the very last 2 steps of this lovely sweater. The first one being crocheting. A lot of vintage patterns assume that if you could knit, you could crochet, so it wasn't really that big of a surprise when you're working through a magazine and you are required at the very end to do a crochet finishing edge, even though you didn't have a crochet hook listed in the materials or the skills needed, or like I said, it was a knitting pattern, not a crocheting pattern. But like many of those, this particular pattern asks you to do 2 rows of single crochet, I think in US, although I'm gonna double check just to be sure, all around the neckline, and to create a little buttonhole. I guess not really a buttonhole, it's more like a loop, button loop, for the closure at the back. Then the very last step is weaving in all the ends. But I think what would be really nice is if I take the time to go ahead and finish this sweater and do all those bits that kind of make me go, ugh, sometimes, like weaving in ends. And we move right to the final reveal of my newest vintage sweater. I am so happy with this sweater. I didn't find a button yet that I am happy with putting on the back closure, but that will happen at some point, I promise. I love this sweater. I love all the little extra details that the cabling adds. It's just that extra bit of interest that really drew me to this pattern in the first place. So I'm so glad that we got it done. Did I do it with just vintage techniques and tools? I guess technically yes, they were all vintage techniques and tools that I was using, including the knitting machine, but home knitting machines are really popular in like the 50s and 60s, and this sweater is from like the 30s, 40s, so it's not super contemporary, but I'm not gonna be so hard on myself because it meant that I was able to finish a vintage sweater, the first one that I have been able to in a while, even if I couldn't do it all by hand. And honestly, I don't want to hurt myself to try to get a sweater done. I think that's kind of not the point of what we're doing. I think it's just fun to see what we can achieve and what we can accomplish, and it's great when you have tools that help you do that. I am warm because it is a wool, but because it's knit slightly looser than you normally would, and it's short sleeved and not super high neck, I think that this can be one that I can wear in transitional seasons, which I like. Love the color too. So yeah, everything about this sweater is a check for me personally. I hope you enjoyed joining me just creating and making a sweater. If you like videos like this, I have put one here for you that I think you might enjoy watching, and I will see you hopefully again very, very soon, or maybe even at this next video. Bye.